Welcome back to Legal Lines. I'm Locke Meredith and pleased to have back on the show Sean Fagan. He's my law partner. We're talking about power and laws and the fact that a law is an exercise of power by the government over people, places, or things. In the beginning, Sean, we talked about that because our founding fathers were taxed without representation and considered themselves terrorized by the king in England, they didn't want a strong, centralized government, all-powerful government over all things. And so they chopped up power, number one, in the federal government between the president, the Congress, and the judiciary. They also only gave very limited powers. If it wasn't in the Constitution written out and said, federal government has this power, then it would remain, that power remained either with the states or with the people themselves. So why were they setting it up that way?
Oh, because of what you said earlier. They were worried about a kingship being formed by the federal government, which is exactly what they tried to avoid when the Civil War, actually Civil War, but the War of Independence started.
And you pointed it out. Representation was the #1 driving kind of theme or guiding principle in the formation of the government of America. And the reason that the power to the federal government was so limited is because the states and the local governments were much more accountable and dealing with on a daily or regular basis with the folks. They were accountable. They had to run, they knew them, and if they screwed up, they were going to be booted out. But if you're dealing with politicians who live in DC and that's the only place they live, they're not very accountable. As we discussed, senators every 6 years, reps 2 years, president 4 years, and Supreme Court never.
That's right.
So tell me how the states set up government.
States set it up very similarly. They had each state has a constitution. They, like the federal government, have the executive branch, the governor. They have the judicial branch, which are going to the state courts, district courts, and the courts of appeal, up to the Supreme Court in each state. And in between, you've got the legislature. Right. Does the same function as we see at the federal level. As you said, though, the whole idea is that they're accountable because they're local. And so was the theory, was that at home, the folks at home would control not only what was happening locally, but have a lot of control of what was happening nationally.
And the beauty, too, I've heard it explained, and it makes a lot of sense, is because we now have 50 states, you can have 50 different ways of dealing with a problem. Each state can write its own laws to deal with an issue in its own unique way. And all the other states can watch how each other's laws work and deal with the issue. And they could say, you know what, state A did much better with this issue. We're going to change our law to mimic that, or if they don't have one. So it's like an incubator, and you got all these experiments going on instead of a one-size-fits-all by the federal government thinking they got it all figured out. You got 50 states pondering the issue with thousands and thousands of folks pondering it, and it results usually in the best decision. The problem, as we've discussed, is that this has been turned on top of itself. Now, instead of the states and the individuals having all the power except that given expressly to the federal government, the federal government seems to have all the power and the states a little bit, and people, they get to vote. That's about it. And right now, it really doesn't seem to matter who they vote for because those guys in DC are doing whatever they want to do.
Well, it's true. And of course, we're seeing that with some of the contemporary issues today. Whether or not you agree with the transgender laws that are coming in, it doesn't matter whether you agree with them.
Doesn't matter what issue.
The point is that you look at the effect of the way the government is implementing its will. In the case of transgender issues in bathrooms and using bathrooms, President Obama has issued an executive order saying that there shall be transgender bathrooms. If they're not transgender bathrooms, then the person can go in and identify, if they identify as a male, even though they're female, they can go into the men's bathroom, and vice versa.
And the hammer that President Obama, the federal government in this case, the president, is using to force states to comply if they don't agree with his decision is what?
Well, what they do is they say we're going to withhold educational funds.
Money.
And
Bottom
so
line is it's money.
It's all about the funds. And so even though we're supposed to have a representative democracy, what you're seeing, regardless of whether you agree with the issue, whichever side you fall on the issue, the concern of everybody should be that you may agree with this issue today, and say, I don't have a problem with it, and I don't have a problem with whether the president's doing this. But if you disagree with something tomorrow, you're going to be seeing the same action by the executive branch unless all of us step up and say, take back control to the states and the people.
So let's talk about how in this case, the presidency has gone from being a co-equal branch, a co-equal amount of power with Congress and the judiciary, to now having the amount of power to basically write laws via rules and regulations and executive orders. No involvement of Congress at all.
Well, I think some of it's just plain confusion. I think if you go and talk to people that are representatives, they've been up there for 2 years, they have no idea how the system works. You've got a bureaucracy within Washington, that people that work there all the time, that basically advise the representatives on what to do and what the laws are, what the procedure is. But it's gone far away from the intent of the founding fathers. What we've got now is a problem where you use an executive order, and even if the executive order is challenged by Congress, it takes so long to go through the whole process.
The judiciary.
Yeah, it goes to court, they challenge it, they say it's unconstitutional, and then 6 years later you get a ruling, and the president that implemented it is long gone.
It's gone. And the bottom line is, the president has become more king-like, and Congress is becoming less powerful, either because they have delegated to the president, whoever he is, Republican, Independent, Democrat, whatever. The Congress has, over the decades, said, we want the president to decide this, and we're going to stay out of it because they don't want to touch the hot potato. And so the president has been given more and more power. We also discussed the fact that the money is the key here, and the president controls, when it's all said and done, because he implements the legislation, he controls literally billions of dollars.
Yeah, in theory, that's not what's supposed to happen. Congress holds the purse strings, and they can say, well, look, we don't agree with this executive order. We're not going to give you the funds that you need to implement that executive order. But what's happening now more and more often is, because of political fears, whether they're going to be reelected or not, they don't challenge an issue, and the less challenges there are, the more powerful the executive becomes.
The judiciary, you brought it up earlier, it says gives great deference to the actions of the president. And the bottom line is, the judiciary, again, has taken to itself more power than the Constitution really gave it, just as perhaps the president has. And because in a decision that was made almost 200 years ago, they said, we're going to be the ones that ultimately decide if an act is constitutional or not. And as a result, we now have a situation where 5 out of 9 justices who are there for life are telling 330 million Americans what they got to do or what they can't do. So let's continue this on the next segment. It's Locke Meredith, my special guest, Sean Fagan, my partner. We'll be right back.
It's time now for Legal Lines Tips with your host, Locke Meredith.
Hello, I'm Locke Meredith with a Legal Lines tip for you. Document your claim. What do I mean? Whenever you present a claim, whether it's for injuries in an automobile collision or for a breach of contract case or a business claim, it all boils down to documentation and evidence. For example, when you go to trial, basically both sides are presenting their evidence of what they believe to be their case. For example, also, if you're involved in an automobile collision, document the event. Talk to all the parties who are involved. Get their names, address, contact information, insurance info. Talk to the witnesses on the scene. Also get their contact information. Take photographs. With the phones we all have these days, everybody can take a picture, and that paints 1,000 words. So document your claim. The Legal Lines tip from me, Locke Meredith, to you is document the claim.
This has been Legal Lines Tips.